All right, I think we're ready to go.
Sweet. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Looks like it's coming up on stream. If somebody could tell me if you can hear Rez on Twitch, that'd be good.
You all hear me all right? At least let Donut know.
Looks like you're good to go.
Deal. So I sent this to Ben when he reached out and initially named it scripts and tricks, but then I realized it makes way more sense to talk about the tricks first before getting into the actual scripts and building those. So I flopped it around for the talk, so it's now FUF, tricks, and scripts. Also probably alternate between calling it FUF and ffuf. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's a web application fuzzing tool written in Go by joohoi. So who am I? Yeah, my name is Joseph Thacker. I'm 29, Christian, husband, and father of two. During the day, I work at App Omni, which is a startup in San Francisco that is working on securing SaaS products for the enterprise, kind of like an all-encompassing solution for posture and configuration management of the different SaaS platforms. And then I started bug bounty hunting about a year and a half ago by jumping on the HackerOne Discord channel and making some friends, and then kind of slowly building from there. And my username is Rezo on all three of the major platforms. My Twitter is Rezo__, and then my blog is rezo.blog. So the agenda for today is listed there on the right. We'll start off with a hacking disclaimer. I'll cover some tricks and then some of the different scripts, which are really just bash aliases. And then joohoi sent me a sneak peek at upcoming features that he hasn't told anyone about. I've got a screenshot of that. And then I'll take some questions. And then I also will drop the link to the slides and to the scripts or the bash aliases that we cover in a GitHub project as well after cover that. So yeah, I'm sure there's disclaimers for pretty much all InfoSec conferences, but specifically with FUF, as it's pretty powerful. Don't break the law, don't go out of scope. Val Ravikant, I don't know if you all know who he is, but pretty big fan of him. And he talks about when you're kind of playing the game of life, you never want to take actions that are a total failure, right? Like you can take high risk actions all you want, you can recover from those, but you don't want to take actions or risks that are going to lead to a complete failure and going to prison or losing the ability to be on computers or laptops kind of ruin the game. So and one aspect of FUF that is really powerful is that it's speed, and it's really easy to DOS or DDoS companies' websites or servers, specifically if you're doing things in parallel or if you're using Axiom to spin up a bunch of servers at once because you're effectively controlling a botnet. This slide does remind me that a lot of my slides have a ton of text on them, which is typically bad form, but I know that when I'm going back through slides and I haven't seen the presentation, I like them to be a little bit more verbose. So it's kind of a trade-off I chose in this presentation, specifically with things being remote. And then the two kind of flags that are useful for cutting down on the power of FUF is -t, which is threads. If you are dealing with a really kind of weak website or something that doesn't have any kind of WAF or DOS protection, then you might want to kick that down pretty low to between 1 and 5. And then you can also use the -rate flag to set the requests per second as well. So we'll kick off with the tricks. The first one is really just noise reduction. And most people probably know many of the things I'm going to cover, especially if you've read my blog post on it or if you've been using FUF for a while. But I think most people will probably get something out of the talk regardless. And for those of you out there that are still using other fuzzers, especially if they work in your workflow, that's great. But I just wanted to present kind of why I think ffuf is awesome and why it's really been my major tool. I probably use it even more than Burp in my bug hunting. I prefer to go kind of wide recon and fuzz for things. So the first kind of trick there is just to use the filter code flag -fc, which filters the status code. And I go into a lot more detail in this in one of my blog posts, but in general, 404s and 400s are kind of the least interesting, followed quickly by, 403s that can't be bypassed, or 302s or 301s. The auto calibrate flag is something that anytime I'm talking to somebody and they talk about how annoying 200s are that just say 404 not found, where the status code is 200, I'm always kind of shocked that people are not using the auto calibrate flag. So -AC will do some auto calibration in fluff, where it sends requests with kind of like an unguessable path, or a path that's extremely unlikely to exist on a host, and then stores those off and uses that as a filter so that you don't get all the noise. And I really do consider it a must use at scale, where you're going to have tons of files on, like, even if you're able to post process it, which is kind of the third option there. If you post, you might not see all that noise, but it's at least going to eat up. The dash auto calibrate flag will not work if you have slashes in your word list, because that also means that your command here is going to be like site.com fuzz without this slash. And so um, the auto calibrate feature just uses a string of characters. It doesn't have a slash at the beginning, so you'll want to use a slash in your command. And so that's just kind of a generic rule for people who use fluff. It's probably better to have all of your word lists without the prepended slashes. And I'll cover the bash aliases I use to post-process content later in the talk. Another big thing that I see people, or that I've mentioned, that kind of got a lot of popularity on Twitter, was the virtual host usage for fuzzing, for ffuf. But I often find when I ask people if they found anything with it, they haven't. And I think it's because they maybe don't understand the different ways that virtual hosts appear in the wild. And I could be wrong about a lot of this. And there may be lots of other variations, but what I typically see when I'm fuzzing are hosts that will, like, if it's like you're browsing to site.com and you're using the host header of site.com, and anything else that you use for the host header breaks it. That's kind of category one. That's like very generic. Seems like that is very common, and it's not that interesting. Category two would be where you go to site.com and it just doesn't matter what host header you give it. It'll return the same content no matter what. Also pretty uninteresting. But the middle ground is when you see a host that when you're fuzzing for a virtual host and you pass in localhost or 127.0.0.1, if that gives you a different response, then it's probably interesting. And I find that on those hosts, kind of, they'll either just be a 403, and I think those are usually AWS. If you get a 403 only on localhost and 127.0.0.1, then that's probably just an AWS host, and it's not that interesting. But there are some of these where localhost responded differently, and the vhost list that I use or other subdomains didn't hit on it. But after looking at it for a while, I was able to find either things like host header based SSRF or other things. But the really interesting ones are category 4 here. And the way I kind of find those is what I'm going to talk about next. So whenever I kick off my scan on, like, my recon scan for a new target, I will usually fuzz it with a vhost list. And so I'll probably show you all some of that in a minute on my server if we end up having time. But it's a list of words like dev and beta and admin and internal and things like that. And so I'll hit all of the subdomains with this very short list of vhost names, like beta or whatever. And it will very frequently be a completely different response than what returns whenever you're just passing in the subdomain that you're browsing to as the host header. Those are extremely interesting, right? You're essentially finding content and finding areas of the app, or maybe even a completely different app that other hunters are not seeing. Also, so subdomains are also kind of interesting. Whenever I get a vhost list or I get a server that's responding differently to something in my vhost list, I'll then fuzz like this second thing here where I'll say host equals fuzz.site.com. And very frequently what I'll find here, and I'll pass in like a list, like a raft list from seclist maybe. What I'll find is that there are subdomains that did not get picked up by my passive DNS that don't even respond to requests from the internet, like just from a public IP address if you try to browse straight to it or even curl it. But it does respond. And so it's some sort of other virtual host living on the same server at a different address. And so obviously that content is very interesting as well. And then the third way, which I don't know if very many people are doing, but anytime I have domains like subdomains for a target that return an internal IP address whenever you query DNS for it, I'll add those to my list of virtual hosts to hit all of my subdomains with, because like you may end up going to like yahoo.com, but internal.yahoo.com as a vhost, like maybe the DNS returned that it was living at some internal IP address. When you fuzz with that, it'll often find it. Then if you ever do find a host-based SSRF, you can generate a whole bunch of internal IPs, like the whole CIDR range for that, and often find a lot of internal servers to hack on as well. So one thing that I wanted to kind of cover is just creative fuzzing to make sure people who are using ffuf are using it to its full potential. So you can obviously fuzz parameters, fuzzing here where ID is, or even the values to parameters like this. And that's very frequently, used to find IDORs, especially when, you create an account on a target and your ID is a 7-character number. Usually just go like 1,000 before, 1,000 after, and kind of fuzz on that. To see if those exist, especially if it's a profile that I can find that maybe it'll show their sensitive information, or it'll have more data than it should in the source of the page when you browse to their profile, etc. And then fuzzing different headers. So you can use any header you want here, whether it's exported for or different cookies. And this is even if you don't actually fuzz for headers. Here, you can also just use the -h flag as a way to pass in your cookies so that you're doing authenticated scanning as well. Fuzzing post data. This is more just so people know. You can also fuzz post data, whether it's JSON or whatever else, via the -d flag. And then another way that I've kind of done this sometimes is if you notice a site is, one thing to keep an eye out for when hacking is if you see devs using a certain pattern over and over and over, like maybe every parameter they use or every endpoint they use starts with like either create or delete. Like, so maybe it's like create account with a capital A, or create create profile then with a capital P. What you want to do is kind of get in their mindset and then it like this. Like, it doesn't have to be in between two special characters. It can actually be just in the center of a word, and ffuff handles that just fine. So this is a good way to kind of find new types of endpoints or parameters that the developers may have used that aren't going to be in your standard word list. And then some people might not know that you can also fuzz multiple places. Naturally, this explodes the amount of requests that this command is going to make, especially if both of your lists are very large. But I do find this to be useful many times when one of my lists is really small. So if I'm trying to do like a 403 bypass and I'm trying a few different bypasses in my, let's say I'm using some 403 bypass list that only has 10 or 20 different things in it, then maybe I'll do it for every domain and then give it the 403 bypass here or something. But the way that you set that is you use an all caps word in your command or in your headers or in your post data. And then when you do the word list, you use a colon to kind of put one on the right like this. So text will be iterated here, and then the pass will be iterated here. Here's some other cool stuff. Is the max time flag. This is really useful if you are going to fuzz, 100,000 subdomains and you want to have a predictable end, because If you don't set a max time and your timeout is something like 10 seconds, and the server's really slow and it's giving you one response per 5 seconds or 10 seconds, then going through a word list of 10,000 words, especially if you're running recursively, that scan's just never going to end. And so you are either going to have to kill it, and if you do that, you might lose the data. Though it was a good feature when ffuf added Control C, like kind of being caught and then writing anyway. Especially if you're kicking this off on multiple servers via Axiom or something like that, then you want to use max time in order to catch that. So how that works is for that instance of ffuf, once it hits 360 seconds, it will stop and write to disk the output. The timeout flag. And so I'll very frequently use this so that it will churn through bad servers kind of quickly. There's a potential risk versus reward here of, if it is a very slow responding server, you might not save off the status code. You may not find that in your results, but I find that the speed gain is usually advantageous for me where I'm scanning at a really large scale. And so what this is, if it sends a request, it just doesn't come back after 3 seconds. It just forgets about it. Custom user agents. This is extremely important when fuzzing with ffuf, especially on big bug bounty targets, because they're starting to just block the ffuf user agent as a whole. So you can just throw anything in there, or I usually try to use a real user agent in case they have some sort of protection against unknown or bad user agents. And then you can often even append your bug bounty handle to the end with like X bug bounty reso or whatever. The dir search and extension flag. Many people don't know this exists, and if you're converting from dir search, a lot of your word lists might have %EXT% at the end of a bunch of words, and so this is the way that you can use that in ffuf without having to make a bunch of different word lists or mess with that. It really allows it to be more flexible. One thing I'll also do, though, rather than doing all this, is just have a word list without extensions and then just append like fuzz.php, so the .php will stay. But this allows you to do multiple extensions with a single scan. This is one thing that I don't think is being leveraged enough, kind of by hackers, and maybe it is, and they're not talking about it publicly. But you can use match regex, which is -mr. So it'll only save off this result. It'll only return the result if it matches whatever regular expression you put here. And so let's say you have a 0 day, or you see one in nuclei, and you'd rather just scan for one thing across the whole internet. You can get a big list of subdomains, and then resolve them to the live HTTP servers, and then fuzz like this, where you're using fuzz as the actual live server, and then you're using the 0 day path here. And you can do this with post requests too. So it could be -x post with the post data. You can put in as many headers as you want, and then you just match the regular expression here. And you could even, if you have some proprietary thing that you love to find, it's kind of interesting, then you can, write a bash alias for this and then kick it off during your recon scan on whatever target you're hacking on. So scripts, which is actually more just bash aliases. The first one is by far my most used, so I wanted to cover it first. I think it is the most useful. And again, you don't need to take screenshots or copy this off, because I'm going to share a link to a GitHub repo that has this in it. And you can also modify this, right? This is just kind of how I find it to be most useful. And I'd love to have suggestions about how I can improve it. So kind of the key components here are the first parameter. So this is how I would kick it off from the command line. I would typically just type in ffuf_r, hit tab, because I have like a bunch of different ffuf bash aliases that I use. And then I'll usually just paste something here. So this can be either a single domain, like a new domain that I found while hacking, or it may be I'm looking, I'm hacking with Burp in a browser, and I see an interesting path in the source. I'll just throw it in here and kick it off and come back and check on the scan in a few minutes. Then the third parameter is the word list. And so you can see this down here too, right? Like the first parameter in bash, $1 or $, and then the value is like the order of these parameters that get passed to it. So $1 is here, and this is just being used to dynamically name it. So here's where the actual main command is. So this is the host that you're fuzzing. So this would be site.com/js, and then the fuzz here. And so then the third parameter is the word list. And then the fourth one, and this is kind of neat. I haven't seen other people do this much, but for all of my tools, anytime I write an alias for them, I always just append a final parameter at the very end where I can kind of tack on any extra things that I want to throw in here. And so I'll do that at the end of all of my ffuf scripts, because sometimes I want to see 404s that are interesting, and sometimes I might not. Sometimes I might be hacking on a target that is throwing 403s everywhere, or for specific weird strings like Adam is in the string anywhere, then throw a 403. And when there's stuff like that, I'll just like filter code 403 from the command line whenever I kick it off. But yeah, what this does is it creates a the very first line here. It creates a recursive folder, a folder called recursive. -p just says don't error if it already exists. And then I use Tom Nom Nom's unfurl here. So what this is doing is echoing number one. So it's just printing out this URL, unfurling it into just the protocol and the domain, and then saving that as the variable DOM. And then down here at the very end, it outputs to recursive, the folder we created, recursive underscore the domain. So that way I have all of my results, all of my recursive scan results in my recursive folder, prepended with recursive, then the domain. And it kicks off the scan with the word list, uses a custom user agent so we don't get blocked by the WAF, and then it uses a custom header just in case they need to, get a hold of me to tell me to slow down or scan less or stop scanning them. And then here's how you use the actual recursion parameters. You can set your depth, and you also tell it to use recursion here. And as I mentioned earlier, I always use auto calibrate to cut down on the amount of noise. Then also match code all, because I think sometimes it's interesting to see the other response codes that happen. So this is ffuf in parallel. Before I used Axiom, this was the majority of the way that I did all of my scanning, because I wanted to get results faster. And if I was scanning on a target, well, I generally prefer to hack on wildcard targets. And so if I'm going to hack on a program with more than 100 domains, and I'm iterating through them one at a time, it's going to take forever to get my results back. So you can probably do this in interlace a lot easier, but I just use xargs. So it just takes in a word list of all the live hosts that you want to hack on. It creates a new directory called all. Then it uses xarg. So this -p5 just says, 5 in parallel. You can run more or less. This, hey, for our input, let's use open and close brackets. And then it's going to pass all of this just to the shell. So, and it does the same thing as the last alias. It dynamically names it via this DOM variable, and then it fuzzes it where we would normally put the domain, because we're this is like an input value of one line by line of all the live hosts, and so that ends up getting placed here where the open and close curly brace are. And then it fuzzes it, my quick hits, match code all, auto calibrate, put to the CSV, and then I give it a max time here, and that's because I'm scanning literally every subdomain for a target with this. So I want to set a max time of 10 minutes here so that it doesn't run for too long. And this is kind of a pared down version. Sometimes I'll put more in here. I'll put in the user agent, or I'll put in my custom header, or I'll put in like a thread or a dash rate. And that was one thing that I wanted to mention here on be careful of your own systems and your program systems. I scanned from a DigitalOcean droplet, and it was the smallest one for a while. And if I ran anything more than 5, it would usually run out of memory and crash all my scans. And so I've bumped it up since then, but I still generally just stick with 5 parallel on a single host. And I do the same thing when I'm running on Axiom, which I'm sure you all see a lot of with Pry coming up here in a few. But anytime I run ffuf on Axiom, I also usually limit it to 5 instances of ffuf per instance, like per node, per server. I haven't seen anybody talk about this either. It's kind of interesting. You can fuzz basic auth with ffuf, and so it just takes in the site that you're trying to brute force the basic auth with, and then whatever other parameters, because I do the thing where I tag it onto the end here. But it does the same thing, dynamically names it, But what you do have to do here is pre-generate all your basic auth payloads. So if you don't know what basic auth is, it's just a way for websites to have authentication. And so it looks like this. It's a header that says our authorization. It's a header that just says authorization : basic. And then where fuzz is, it's a base64 encoded username and password pair with a colon in the center. So you can just either write up some code in Bash or Python to do this for you. And all you have to do is take common usernames like admin or test or dev, and then append them with a colon, and then append them with a password. And so you can take most common password list and very easily generate yourself a basic auth word list, and then fuzz basic auth like this. Cool. Post-processing is something that I actually think a lot of people fail at. They often feel like ffuf and other fuzzers are too noisy, and they have a hard time going through the results. This is I'm often asking myself, like, hey, I'm not as smart or as intelligent as a lot of these other hackers out there, especially a lot of very hardworking hackers that I talk with. It seems like when we're discussing things, they know more than I do, and so I kind of ask myself, like, why have I been successful? And I do think that being able to, when you run into an issue like, I have too much data to go through, how can I go through it? I think that I've been able to find solutions for that. And so this is one way that I do that. And you can obviously modify these as much as you want, but if you'd like to view your FUF results, for me, because I normally have all of my data in CSV files, I just do a find-name of star.csv. And so it finds all recursive files. Because I have a single folder per target, I'm usually in that folder when I call this command. And it'll be at the end of all of my recon script running. And so I've got a bunch of CSV folders, typically, or a bunch of CSV files, typically in different folders. Like I'll have like a recursive scans, a quick hits, a vhost folder, and I'd prefer just to go through all that data at once. So I'll kick off one of these two post-processing bash aliases. So for the first, it finds all the CSV files. Then it does this execute where it cats the file. And so it's catting all of the CSV files. So now it's writing all of the results from all of my FUF out to the standard out. And it's going through sed, where it's replacing all of the commas with spaces, and G just means global, and S is substitute. And so then that's piping it into a sort where, and this is really the moneymaker, is like you want to sort unique by column 5 if you're doing CSV, because that's the response size. And it's very unlikely that you will have a lot of interesting results to have the same response size. You might with lower ones, like, response size less than 10 or less than 100. But it's very uncommon that at higher ones, you're going to have a lot of different responses with the same size. So I do a unique sort by the 5th column, which is the response size, and then sort it numerically. And what generally ends up happening, I do usually end up going through all of it eventually, but what generally ends up happening is I'll go to and then I open it in them, which you can open it in whatever, or write to the screen, or write to a file. Generally, at the very bottom of the file will be some huge findings. Like it's usually like, 5 gigabyte zip files, or huge error pages, or SQL error logs. And I found that on multiple programs, and they usually end up being highs or crits. And then at the top is all the small responses. So it's like when you hit an API and it just says unauthorized, right? Like that's only got a response size of like 7 characters. And so, yeah, unauthorized is spelled with way more than 7 characters. But, and so, you'll want to kind of tend to look at the top and the bottom. And then I'll go through it more thoroughly after I've kind of looked at those really interesting responses. The second one, I don't really know how it works. I think Pry sent it to me. It's kind of like magic, but it makes it look like it's in pretty columns. And so you can figure it out yourself. But here's kind of how they look. This is just responses from my blog, but please don't fuss my blog. It's just on GitHub pages. It's not hosted anywhere special. But with this first one, it doesn't look as pretty. But it's kind of nice to be able to just visually parse this first column with what the fuzz parameter was. And then the second one is like this, and it'll actually chop off anything that's beyond a certain number of characters here. So sometimes you lose some data there, but this is also kind of pretty to be able to see all the status codes here and then also the response sizes here. So we're doing fine on time. Oh, no, I was supposed to do 30 minutes, but I don't think there's a talk after me, so I went over a little bit. So this is kind of neat. Joohoi, let me say, or let me see what the next kind of iteration of ffuf is going to be. And these features are really neat. He hasn't told anyone about them, so just for tuning in, you get to see some pretty cool stuff. So he's making it interactive where while the run is going, you can hit enter and it will pause it. And you can see him doing that right here. So he hit enter right here. And then you have all these commands you can do. So what he did here in this screenshot is he filtered by size 169. And not only does it do it for all the results once you start the scan again, but it also happens retroactively to your results output file. So, you know, you kick off a scan, you're watching it run, and you want to immediately filter those results both visually and also in the output. You just hit enter, filter the size by whatever you want, then kick it off again. You can also go ahead and save off all the current matches to a file right now. And so that'll be really nice if you see something beautiful light up and you're ready to go hack on it and the private program just opened and you can go ahead and write it off to a file. You can also print out the current matches just from the interactive mode, so this is me. Whenever I fuzz recursively, I'll very often have a bad entry in one of my word lists that just will cause infinite recursion. And so you can, pause that and just destroy any bad recursion jobs, delete them. And you can also see how many are left and what they're going to be. We're nearing the end here. I definitely want to implore everyone to go sponsor him. He has put a ton of his personal time and effort into this. I personally think it's the best web fuzzing tool out there. And I think that if he continues to be sponsored, he's going to keep adding more amazing features. I'm sure that any amount is appreciated, but at the $10 a month level, you get what he calls sponsorware level, which just means that you get all of the features 30 days before anyone in the public, which is pretty awesome. And I'm glad that he decided to go to sponsorware because such an awesome tool, which is helping so many companies and individuals, is just worthy of payment. It's worthy of contribution. So. First, I want to say thanks to Ben for setting up the conference and inviting me to be one of the speakers. Obviously, thank you so much to the platforms for bringing in clients that allow us to have fun, learn a lot, and earn some money. And of course, Joohoi for ffuf itself. There is the link to my scripts and to ffuf and also to where to sponsor Joohoi. And I put that, I'll put that in the chat as soon as the talk is over. And then I was going to open it up for questions. I'm pretty sure we don't have anyone until for another 30 minutes. Can you confirm that, Donut? Okay, sweet. Yeah, there's no one on, so I can actually take some questions if anybody wants to ask a few before I hop off. Sweet. Well, thank you all so much. And I'll drop the slides. Okay, sweet. Yeah, I'll hop off here, but feel free to message me on Twitter or on the Discord. I really appreciate you all tuning in.
Hi everyone. The stream will be shut down a little bit just since we have a break between speakers, and then it'll come back up just in time for the next speaker. Thank you very much for tuning in, and the next talk will be available here on the Twitch stream if you're not in the Recon Village Discord already. Thanks.